My parents sent my 8-year-old daughter outside during freezing rain after my sister's kids said she broke the family heirloom. Dad growled, "Get out. I don't shelter rotten blood." 3 hours later, the hospital called me. 1 hour later, Mom walked in. When she saw me holding the doctor's report and the heirloom still hidden in my sister's bag, she couldn't breathe. You found it? How did you get here?" My daughter was 8 years old when my parents put her outside in freezing rain and locked the door. I was 40 minutes away. Nobody called me. Nobody texted. Rosie stood on that porch for 3 hours in a coat that was not warm enough for February in Kingsford, Missouri, because my sister's 10-year-old had said she broke the family heirloom, and my father had looked at my daughter and said, "Get out. I don't shelter rotten blood." 3 hours later, the hospital called me. When I got there, Rosie was sitting up in a bed with an IV in her arm and a crayon in her hand, and she looked at me and said, "Mommy, I didn't break it." I know, baby. I know. Because by the time my mother walked into that hospital room, I was already holding the proof. My name is Hazel Merritt. I am 33 years old. I am a child protective services worker in Kingsford, Missouri, which means I have spent 7 years knocking on doors and sitting across from parents who had explanations for things that required more than explanations. I know what exposure does to a child's core temperature. I know what 3 hours in February rain looks like in a medical chart. I know the difference between an accident and a construction. I never thought I would need that knowledge for my own daughter. Subscribe to Calm Life Stories and drop a comment telling me how this one lands for you, because this story does not end in that hospital room. It ends when my mother walks in and sees what I am holding. I have been thinking about that sentence for weeks now. The sentence my father said. The way it came out of him, not with heat, but with the specific coldness of a thing he had decided was true a long time ago and was now stating as a matter of record. Rotten blood. He said it to an 8-year-old standing in front of him in a room full of family photographs. In a house where she had been coming since she was born, in front of a fireplace she had warmed herself at 100 times. He said it, and then he opened the door. I have also been thinking about the way Rosie walked outside. She walked outside. She did not argue. She did not cry. She did not run to her grandmother or reach for the phone or ask someone to call me. She walked to the porch and she sat on the step and she waited. 8 years old, sitting on the step of a house she had loved, in freezing rain, waiting for someone to notice. She waited 3 hours. A 72-year-old woman across the street noticed. Not the people inside the house, the woman across the street who was watching from a window. I want to stay with that for a moment. 3 hours. 2 adults in the house. 1 grandmother who managed through presentation. 1 grandfather who used his authority to put a child outside. And the child they put outside sat on their step for 3 hours without any of them opening the door. That is a choice, not the impulse of a moment. A choice made and sustained for 3 hours. Let me give you the family first, because what happened on that February afternoon did not arrive without a history. My father, Vernon, is 64 years old. He is a man who has spent his entire life believing that authority is a character trait rather than a responsibility, that the right to govern a room comes from occupying it longest. He is not a man who shouts. He growls, which is quieter and carries further, a sound that comes from somewhere below the throat and has the specific quality of something that is already decided and is informing rather than discussing. My mother, Corinne, manages through presentation. She is the kind of woman who arrives at difficult situations with her coat buttoned all the way up and her face arranged in appropriate expression before she has entered the room. She has never, in 33 years, said a hard thing without first preparing the softness around it. The softness is not kindness, it is packaging. My sister Sloane is 3 years younger than me. She married a man named Park 6 years ago, and they have a daughter, Ivy, who is 10. Sloane has my mother's gift for presentation and my father's conviction that the room belongs to her. She and I have been cordial rather than close for most of our adult lives, which is the specific distance that develops between sisters when one of them has always been the favorite and the other has always known it, and neither of them says it out loud. The heirloom was a small porcelain figurine, a shepherd girl, pale blue dress, one hand raised, about 6 inches tall. It had sat on the mantelpiece in my parents' living room for as long as I could remember. My grandmother had brought it from her own mother's house, and it had been in the family for 50 years or more. My mother talked about it the way she talked about things she wanted people to understand mattered, which was with the particular reverence that is designed to make clear that you are allowed to look and not touch. Rosie knew this. Rosie had been visiting that house since she was born, and she had never once touched the figurine. She is the kind of child who understands the weight of breakable things. She carries cups with 2 hands. She sets glasses down slowly. She is 8 years old and she has never broken a single thing that did not belong to her, and she has the specific solemnity of a child who takes care because she has learned that care is necessary. None of that mattered to my father on the afternoon of February 14th. Rosie had been at my parents' house since noon. I had dropped her there on my way to a home visit, the kind of case that requires full attention and cannot be rescheduled, and my parents had agreed to have her for the afternoon. This was normal. Rosie went to her grandparents' house regularly. She liked the kitchen, and she liked the garden in summer, and she liked my father's workshop in the back, where he kept old tools she was allowed to look at from the doorway but not enter. She did not like Ivy. She had told me this once, carefully. The way she tells me things she has thought about. Ivy isn't mean to me when adults are there. That is the exact sentence she used. I had filed it the way I file things at work, as information that required watching rather than immediate action, and I had told her to stay near the adults when Ivy was around. On February 14th, Ivy told my father that Rosie had knocked the figurine off the mantelpiece. I was not there. I did not witness what happened. What I have is what Rosie told me in the hospital and what my neighbor Dorothy confirmed when she called me 3 weeks later, having sat with the guilt of it long enough that she needed to say something. According to Rosie, Ivy came running to my father in the kitchen with her hands cupped in front of her, holding something. And she was crying, and she said Rosie pushed the figurine, and it fell and broke, and here are the pieces. My father came into the living room. He looked at the mantelpiece, which was empty. He looked at Rosie, who was standing across the room, nowhere near the mantelpiece, and he looked at the expression on her face, which was the expression of a child who does not know yet what she is being accused of. He did not ask her what happened. He did not call me. He did not call Dean. He opened the front door and he pointed at the porch and he said the sentence I am going to give you now exactly, because Rosie gave it to me exactly. The way children give you things they have memorized, because the memorizing was the only way to hold them. Get out. I don't shelter rotten blood. Rosie walked outside. The door closed behind her. It was February 14th. It was 31 degrees. The freezing rain had started at around 2 in the afternoon, and it was falling steadily. Rosie was wearing a fleece zip-up that was not a winter coat because I had thought she would be inside. She stood on the porch for 3 hours. If you have ever had a child tell you something that happened to them and felt the specific cold of understanding it after the fact, comment Rotten Blood below and subscribe to Calm Life Stories. Dorothy told me, when she called 3 weeks later, what those 3 hours had looked like from her window. She said Rosie had stood at first. She had stood on the porch step with her hands at her sides and her face forward, and Dorothy had thought she was looking at something in the yard, the way children look at things in yards, with that specific, interested attention. She had not thought to worry. Children stand outside. Children look at things. By 3 o'clock, she had noticed that Rosie had not moved. Not in the way that suggested she was watching something, in the way that suggested she was not sure what else to do. Dorothy had gone to the window at that point, and she had seen the rain coming down, and she had seen Rosie's shoulders. She said the shoulders were what made her understand something was wrong, not the shaking, the stillness inside the shaking. Rosie was not shivering the way children shiver when they have run inside and are warming up. She was shivering the way a body shivers when it has been cold for a long time and is not being warmed. Dorothy watched for another 20 minutes before she went out. She said later that she wished she had gone sooner, and that the 20 minutes was something she was still working through. I told her she had gone. I told her that mattered more than when. Rosie, when Dorothy came across the street, looked at her with the expression that breaks something in me when I think about it, which is often. She looked at her with relief, not surprise. Relief, as if she had been waiting for someone to notice and had been uncertain whether noticing was going to happen. Dorothy took her inside briefly to calm me and to get her into the car. She said Rosie did not ask for her mother immediately. She asked if they were going somewhere warm. Dorothy said yes. Rosie said okay. She got into the car. She did not cry at any point during the drive to the hospital. She asked for crayons when they reached the emergency room. My neighbor Dorothy is 72 years old. She lives across the street from my parents, and she has the quality of a woman who notices things from windows without making a performance of noticing them. She saw Rosie on the porch at around 3 in the afternoon. She thought my parents were watching from inside and that Rosie was playing. By 4, she had started to wonder. By 4:30, she could see that Rosie was shivering from across the street, and she put on her coat and went over. Rosie was sitting on the porch step with her knees pulled to her chest and her arms wrapped around herself, and she was shaking hard enough that Dorothy could see it from the sidewalk. Dorothy knocked on the door. My mother opened it. Dorothy told her Rosie needed to come inside. My mother said Rosie needed to stay outside until she understood what she had done. Dorothy looked at my mother for a long moment. Then she looked at Rosie. Then she said she was taking Rosie to the hospital and that my mother could call whoever she needed to call. She took Rosie to Kingsford General. She called me from the car. I got the call at 4:47 p.m. I was driving back to the office. I pulled over. The nurse on the phone said my daughter had been brought in by a neighbor. Mild hypothermia, temperature of 95.8. She was stable. Please come. I have been a child protective services worker for 7 years. I know what 95.8 means. I know what 3 hours in freezing rain at 31 degrees does to a child who weighs 52 pounds. I know how close 95. 8 is to the number that changes the conversation from mild to serious. I drove 40 minutes in silence, not because I had nothing to say, because what I had to say was not something I could say while driving. Rosie was drawing when I got there. She had asked a nurse for crayons, and she was working on something with the full concentration she gives to things that matter to her, the same concentration she gives to spelling tests and to making birthday cards for people she loves. She looked up when I came through the door, and the first thing she said, before I said anything, before I had even put down my bag, was, "Mommy, I didn't break it. Not I'm okay. Not I'm cold. Not I'm scared." She needed me to know she hadn't broken it. That was the first thing. After 3 hours in freezing rain and an IV in her arm and a temperature that should not have been what it was, the thing she needed to clear was her name. I sat on the edge of the bed, and I held her hand, and I told her I believed her. She nodded once, seriously, the way she nods when something important has been confirmed. Then she went back to her drawing. Dr. Ren Nakamura came in 20 minutes later. She is a pediatrician with the specific manner of someone who has delivered difficult information to parents many times and has learned that directness, delivered with care, is the kindest thing. She showed me the chart. She walked me through the temperature readings, the timeline, the treatment. She used the word exposure. She used the phrase preventable. She did not say negligence, but the space where that word would have gone was not empty. Do you know how long she was outside? Doctor, Nakamura asked. Approximately 3 hours, I said. She looked at me for a moment. You work in Child Protective Services. Yes, she said. Then you know what I'm required to report. Yes, I said, and I know what I'm required to do. We understood each other without saying the rest of it out loud. I want to tell you about Rosie before I tell you about what happened to her, because she is the whole story and I do not want her to exist in this account only as someone things were done to. Rosie Merritt is 8 years old. She has her father's dark eyes and her own particular way of entering a room, which is to look at it before she looks at the people in it, assessing the space before she decides how to be in it. She has been doing this since she could walk. I do not know whether it is something she was born with or something she learned from watching me work, but I recognize it, and I think it is one of the reasons she and I understand each other with fewer words than most people need. She is careful. That is the word I would use if I had one word. She handles glasses with 2 hands. She holds doors for people without being told. She makes cards for her friends' birthdays with specific drawings of things those friends like, not generic flowers and hearts, but actual specific things. A soccer ball for Mia, a dog named Chester for Priya, a stack of chapter books for her teacher Mrs. Ose. She notices what people love, and she makes that into the thing she gives them. She had been going to my parents' house since she was born. She knew my mother's kitchen and my father's workshop and the order in which things were done there. She knew the rules of that house the way children know the rules of houses they visit often. Not because anyone recites them, but because children read the air of a room and learn what is permitted from the quality of the quiet. She knew not to touch the figurine. She had never touched it. I know this not because she told me, but because Rosie does not touch things that are not hers. She does not need to be told twice about anything. She spent 3 hours outside in February rain because a cousin who was not careful said she had broken something she had never touched. That is the sentence. Those are the facts. I have spent the weeks since trying to find a way to make those facts feel less like what they are, and I have not been able to do it, and I have stopped trying. When I went back to my parents' house for Rosie's things, my father opened the door, and I want to give you what happened in that house, because it is necessary. He stepped aside, and I came in, and I did not look at him directly, and I went to the room where Rosie had been, and I gathered her things. He followed me to the doorway. He stood there, with his arms crossed, and the expression he uses when he has decided that the appropriate posture is waiting for me to say something he can respond to, waiting for the opportunity to defend. I did not give him the opportunity. I picked up Rosie's backpack. I picked up her water bottle. I picked up her library book, which was a picture book about a girl who keeps bees, which she had brought from home to show my mother, because Rosie loves that book and she loves showing people things she loves. I found the bag. I found what was inside it. I photographed everything. I put the cardigan over my arm. On my way out, I passed my father in the doorway, and I stopped. He looked at me, and he had recalibrated. The waiting expression was gone. What was underneath it was something older and smaller. The specific expression of a man who has done the irreversible thing and is beginning to understand it is irreversible. I looked at him for a moment. I thought about all the things I could say, and I chose none of them. I chose silence, which is the thing I have learned at work is often more specific than words, because words can be argued with and silence cannot. He said she needed to understand consequences. I looked at him. She is 8 years old, I said. She understands consequences perfectly. She understood them on that porch. He said nothing. I walked out. When I went back to my parents' house for Rosie's things, my father opened the door. He had the expression he uses when he has decided the appropriate posture is waiting for me to say something he can respond to, waiting for the opportunity to defend the thing he did. I did not give him the opportunity. I went to the room where Rosie had been playing. I gathered her backpack, her water bottle, her library book about a girl who keeps bees. He followed me to the doorway and stood there with his arms crossed and said nothing while I moved around the room. On my way out, I stopped in front of him. He looked at me and I could see that he had recalibrated. The waiting posture was gone. What was underneath it was something older, the specific expression of a man who has done the irreversible thing and has started to understand it is irreversible. She needed to understand consequences, he said. I looked at him. She is 8 years old, I said. She understands consequences perfectly. She understood them on that porch. He said nothing further. I walked out. I want to tell you about the bag. I want to stay with that moment in my parents' house longer, because the 4 seconds I stood looking at what was inside that bag are the 4 seconds the whole story turns on. The figurine was not hidden. It was simply there, in the bag. Sitting upright the way you place something you do not want damaged, with a folded piece of cloth beneath it to cushion the base. Pale blue dress. One hand raised. The same pastoral figure I had been looking at on my parents' mantelpiece since childhood. Intact, no cracks, no chips. The same piece that Ivy had reportedly carried to my father in broken pieces that afternoon. Except it was not broken. It was sitting in Sloane's bag in its original condition. I took my phone out. I photographed the figurine in the bag from 2 angles, close enough that the details of the piece were visible, far enough that the bag and its contents were clearly identified. Then I reached past it, and I found the receipt underneath. The paper was folded precisely, the way you fold something you put away carefully, not crumpled, not forgotten. Stored, I unfolded it. I read the date. I read the seller. I read the item description. I read the buyer's name. 8 months ago, Sloane had bought this. She had carried it here today in this bag. She had waited for a moment, and when Ivy broke the original and brought her the pieces. She had seen the moment, and she had used it. I refolded the receipt. I photographed it separately, flat, all text visible. I placed it back exactly as I found it. I pulled the cloth back over the figurine. I adjusted the bag so the top fell the same way it had been before. Then I picked up Rosie's cardigan from the handle of the bag, and I stood in that room for a long moment, looking at the space where everything had just changed. I have worked in child protective services for 7 years. I have been in rooms where I found things people had hidden, documents, objects, evidence of things done or not done to children. I have learned to maintain a professional quality in those rooms, not coldness, but the specific steady attention of someone who understands that what happens next depends on the quality of what happened in this moment. I held that quality now in my parents' house on a Tuesday in February. Then I picked up Rosie's things and I walked out. When I arrived at the hospital, I had come directly from my car. I did not have Rosie's jacket. Dean was not reachable. I needed to go back to my parents' house to get Rosie's things before I could take her home, and I did not want to take her with me, so I asked the nurse to sit with her for 20 minutes and I drove back to Kingsford. My mother was not at the house when I arrived. My father opened the door. He looked at me and he did not say anything immediately. He had the expression of a man who has done something he believed was justified and is now reading the room to determine whether justification is still the frame. I did not give him a frame. I need Rosie's things, I said. He stepped aside. I went to the room where Rosie had been playing that afternoon. Her backpack was there. Her water bottle. Her library book. I picked them up, and I looked around the room, and I saw Sloane's bag on the chair near the window. I want to tell you why I looked in the bag. I want to be precise about this because it matters. I looked in the bag because Rosie's red cardigan, the one she had been wearing when she arrived, was draped over the handle of the bag. I reached for the cardigan. When I lifted it, the bag shifted, and the top of it fell open, and I saw what was inside. The porcelain figurine. Pale blue dress. One hand raised, 6 inches tall. Intact, I did not move for approximately 4 seconds. Then I reached into the bag past the figurine, and I found what was beneath it. A receipt, paper, folded twice, from an estate sale in Millbrook, dated 8 months prior. Seller, Hartwell Estate Liquidators. Item: porcelain shepherd figurine, pastoral design. Price, $40. Buyer, S. Aldridge Park. I photographed the figurine in the bag. I photographed the receipt. I placed both back exactly where I had found them. Then I picked up Rosie's things and I walked out. I sat in my car in my parents' driveway for 2 minutes, not composing myself, doing the math. Sloan had purchased a figurine identical to the family heirloom 8 months ago. She had brought it with her today. Ivy had presented what she said were the broken pieces of the original to my father. The original was intact in Sloan's bag, which meant either the original had been broken by Ivy at some point today, and Sloan had hidden the pieces and produced the purchased duplicate as proof, or the original had been broken before today, and Sloan had been carrying the duplicate for use whenever an opportunity presented itself. Either way, it was not an impulse. It was a plan. Comment rotten blood if you have ever held proof in your hands and understood in that moment exactly what had been done and how long it had been planned. Subscribe to Calm Life Stories. My mother arrived at the hospital 45 minutes after I returned. I know the exact timing because I had been watching the door. Rosie was asleep by then, the sleep of a child whose body has been working to recover, and I was sitting in the chair beside her bed with Dr. Nakamura's report in one hand and my phone in the other, the photograph of the bag on the screen. The door opened. Corinne Aldridge walked in with her coat buttoned all the way up and her face arranged in the expression she uses when she intends to produce grief visibly so that the grief can do the work of managing the room. She had her keys in one hand. She looked at Rosie sleeping. She looked at me. Then she saw what was in my hands. She saw the doctor's report first. Her expression shifted. Then she saw my phone screen, the photograph of Sloan's bag with the figurine visible inside it, and the shift completed into something I had never seen on my mother's face in 33 years of watching it. Not grief, not guilt, terror. She could not speak for a moment. When she did, the packaging was gone. What came out was the raw register of a person who has understood that the room has changed completely and irreversibly. You found it, not a statement, not quite a question. The specific register of a person confirming a catastrophe. You found it. How did you get here? I looked at her from across my daughter's hospital bed. The same way Rosie got here, I said. A neighbor. She closed her eyes. I did not wait for them to open. She was outside for 3 hours, I said. She is 8 years old. She has an IV in her arm because her core temperature was 95.8 when Dorothy brought her in. She asked a nurse for crayons when she arrived because she wanted to make me something, and the first thing she said when I walked through that door was that she didn't break it. I kept my voice at the register I use at work when I need a parent to hear something they don't want to hear. After 3 hours in February rain, the first thing she needed was for me to know she hadn't broken it. My mother's eyes opened. She looked at Rosie sleeping. Sloan brought it, she said, flat, separate, like setting something down she had been carrying. She brought the duplicate. I didn't know she was going to use it today. I knew she had it. I didn't know it was going to be today. I looked at her for a moment. You knew she had a duplicate figurine. She didn't answer. Mom, I waited until she looked at me. You sat in that house while your granddaughter stood in freezing rain for 3 hours, and you told my neighbor she needed to stay out there to understand what she had done. What she had done was nothing. She had done nothing except exist in a way that your husband had decided was unacceptable. Her hand went to the top button of her coat. Your father and Sloane have been concerned about Rosie's influence on Ivy, she said. Her voice had the strained quality now of structure without foundation. The way she asks questions, the way she argues with adults. Ivy comes home from time with Rosie and she pushes back. She questions things she didn't used to question. I looked at my mother. Rosie teaches her to argue, she said. With adults, I said. Yes, because she has learned, I said quietly, that the adults in her life sometimes do things that need to be questioned. My mother looked at the window. She is a child, she said. She is not supposed to question the adults in this family. I understood then, fully and completely, what rotten blood meant. It did not mean Rosie's character or her behavior or something wrong with her. It meant that Rosie asked questions. It meant that I had raised a child who pushed back and that Ivy had started doing the same, and that my father had decided this quality, this specific quality I consider the best thing I have ever given my daughter, was contamination. He put her in the rain to correct it. I am going to file a mandatory report with Children's Services tomorrow morning, I said. I am telling you before the process tells you, because you are her grandmother and I am giving you that much. I want you to understand what the receipt in Sloane's bag means legally. Sloane purchased that figurine 8 months ago. She brought it to the house today. That is not an impulse. That is premeditation. The petition my attorney files will include photographs and a receipt, and Dr. Nakamura's report and my professional assessment as a certified child welfare worker. My mother's hand tightened on the button. Mom, I said one more time. Her eyes came to mine. She asked for crayons. Before I got here, before the doctor had seen her, before anything. She asked for crayons and she made me a drawing and she held it out with 2 hands when I came through the door. That is who she is. I paused. That is the child you left in the rain. My mother reached up and undid the top button of her coat. It was the first time I had seen her do that in a hard room. The button opened, and the armor came slightly loose, and underneath it was just my mother, 61 years old, standing at the foot of her granddaughter's hospital bed, understanding something that could not be undone. I called Prentice Holbrook that evening. He is a family attorney I have referred clients to through my work, a man with the specific competence of someone who has handled difficult family matters without drama or performance. I told him what had happened. I sent him the photographs. He called me back in 20 minutes. He said what Dr. Nakamura had said in different language. He said words that I already knew and that I needed to hear from someone outside my own head. Documentation, report, protection order, civil exposure. He said, the receipt is significant. I said I knew. He said, this was premeditated. I said I knew that too. He filed the emergency protection petition the following morning. The petition cited the exposure incident, Dr. Nakamura's report, my professional assessment as a certified child welfare worker, and the photographic evidence of the figurine and the receipt. My father received the petition by courier the following Thursday. I know this because Dwight, my father's older brother, called me on Friday. He is 71, and he lives 40 miles from Kingsford, and he has always existed at the edge of our family in the specific way of a man who sees clearly and has chosen, for most of his life, to see clearly from a distance. He said, I heard what happened. I told him I knew he would. I want to say something to you, he said, and I want you to hear it as someone who is outside this. I was listening. He told me he had heard my father use the phrase rotten blood in reference to Rosie 4 times. He gave me 3 specific contexts with approximate dates. The first was at the hospital the day she was born. He had stood in the corridor outside the maternity ward and said to Dwight quietly that he hoped the child would not turn out to have her mother's trouble blood. The second was at Rosie's 2nd birthday, when Rosie had refused a piece of cake and argued for the blue cup instead of the red one. My father had said to my mother, low enough that only Dwight heard, that the child already had her mother's blood in her. The third was at Christmas 2 years ago. Rosie had asked my father a question about his workshop that he apparently felt was too specific. He had come back to the living room and said she asked too many questions, that rotten blood always wanted to know too much. Dwight said he had not spoken on any of those occasions. I should have, he said. The first time I should have. I held the phone. Why does he say it? I asked. What does he actually mean? Dwight was quiet for a moment. You left, he said finally. When Rosie was born, you stopped doing things the way he wanted them done. You stopped being manageable. He decided it was her blood in you, her influence. I thought about that for a long time after the call. The idea that my father had decided my daughter was the reason I had become someone he could not control. That an 8-year-old child had been assigned responsibility for my independence. That rotten blood was the name he gave to a child who had nothing to do with his inability to manage me. She was outside for 3 hours in February rain. She was 8 years old, and she was the best person who had been in that house that afternoon. That is the whole verdict. Dwight sent the written statement the following week. He asked me to call him when the hearing was over. I did. He said he was glad it had gone the way it had. He said he was going to call his brother, my father, the following Sunday. He did not tell me what he was going to say, and I did not ask. Some conversations belong to the people having them. I only know that after that Sunday call, my father called me for the first time since the hospital. He did not say much. He said he wanted me to know he had never meant to hurt Rosie. I told him I knew he had not planned to hurt her. I told him that the absence of a plan does not make a thing not happen. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I know. Those 2 words from my father, who does not admit things, who growls rather than confesses, who has spent 64 years being the authority in every room he enters, landed the way only 2 words can land when they come from someone who has never said them before. I wrote them down afterward, not as evidence, as a record of something that had changed. She was outside for 3 hours. She was the best person in that house, and he called it rotten blood. That is the whole thing. Sloane called me once, 9 days after the hospital. I answered because I wanted to hear it from her directly. She said she hadn't meant for Rosie to be outside for that long. She said she thought Vernon would let her back in after a few minutes. She said the duplicate had been in her bag for months, and she had not intended to use it that day, but then Ivy came to her crying after she had broken the figurine, and Sloane had made a decision in a moment that she now understood was wrong. I let her finish. You purchased the figurine 8 months ago, I said. Silence. You had it in your bag today, I said. You drove to my parents' house with it. You didn't accidentally use it. You used it when the moment appeared. More silence. Sloane, I said. Ivy broke the original and brought you the pieces, and you hid them and produced the duplicate and sent your niece outside in February rain to freeze. And you're describing that to me as a decision in a moment. She said she was sorry. She said it twice. I believe she meant it in the specific way that people mean sorry when they are sorry about the consequence rather than the act. I said, I need you to not contact me for a while. She said she understood. The protection petition remains active. My parents have not had unsupervised access to Rosie since February 14th. This is not something I announced to the family. It is something that exists in a courthouse in Kingsford, Missouri, in a file with Dr. Nakamura's report and Prentice Holbrook's petition and my photographs. Documents do not announce themselves. They simply exist, and they simply stay true. The protection petition was granted on a provisional basis 6 days after Prentice filed it. The judge's order required that any contact between Rosie and my parents or my sister be supervised by a neutral third party, pending a hearing scheduled for 8 weeks out. My parents did not contest the provisional order. I found out later, through Prentice, that Sloane had spoken to a family attorney within 48 hours of the petition filing. The attorney had apparently advised her on the matter of the receipt and the figurine with enough specificity that Sloane understood what a premeditation argument looked like in a courtroom. She did not contest the provisional order either. The hearing was held in April. I was there. Prentice was there. Dr. Nakamura provided a written statement. Dwight provided a written statement that described the 4 times he had heard my father use the phrase rotten blood in reference to Rosie, with approximate dates and contexts for 3 of them. The order was made permanent. Supervised contact only through a family mediation service on a schedule that requires Rosie's consent. She has not consented. She is 8 years old, and nobody is going to ask her to do something she does not want to do. Not anymore. I want to tell you what the days after the hospital looked like for Rosie, because stories about children in danger have a way of stopping at the crisis and leaving the recovery unspoken, as if what came after mattered less than what came before. What came after mattered more. Rosie came home from the hospital on a Wednesday. Her temperature had normalized. She was tired in the way children are tired when their bodies have been working. She slept for most of Thursday. On Friday, she asked to go to the library. She wanted her book about the girl who keeps bees. She had left it at my parents' house, and I had retrieved it from her bag, and she did not ask why it had taken a day to come home. Because Rosie is 8 years old, and she understands more than she is supposed to, and she asks the questions she has decided she is ready to hear the answers to. She did not ask about her grandparents for 3 weeks. When she finally did, she said it the way she says careful things, looking at me first to establish that the question was safe. "Are we going to go back there?" she asked. I told her no, not the way things were now, not for a while. She looked at the table for a moment. Then she looked back at me. "Okay," she said, that single word, delivered with the specific solemnity of a child who has absorbed something and made her peace with it. She did not cry. She did not ask more questions. She went back to her book. Later that evening, she asked if we could get a library card at a new library, one closer to where we lived, because she had been using my parents' neighborhood branch, and she thought maybe it was time to have one that was ours. I said yes. We got the card the following Saturday. She checked out 4 books. She held them against her chest with both arms on the way out. She drew another house a few weeks later, at school. Her teacher, Mrs. Osai, sent it home with a note saying Rosie had worked on it for the whole art period and had been very serious about it. The house in this drawing had a red door. 2 figures again, but they were inside the house this time, not in front of it. She had drawn curtains in the windows and a small table with 2 chairs. I put it beside the one from the hospital on the small shelf in my bedroom, where I keep the things that matter most. She is 8 years old. She kept asking questions. She made drawings of houses she wants us to have. She held out that first drawing with 2 hands when I walked through that hospital door. That is the whole answer to rotten blood. That is the whole answer to everything said in that house on February 14th. Rosie finished her drawing in the hospital while I was talking to Dr. Nakamura. When I came back to the room, she was holding it out to me, her arm extended, serious and waiting. It was a house with a yellow door, 2 figures in front of it, one tall, one small, both of them with stick arms reaching toward each other. She had pressed hard with the yellow crayon on the door, the way she presses when something is important. I took it from her. I held it. I looked at it for a long moment, and I thought about the word rotten, the way my father had used it, the way he had assigned it to this child who was sitting in a hospital bed having made a drawing for me, who had told me first thing that she hadn't broken anything, who had spent 3 hours in February rain and come out the other side making something for someone she loved. "What's the house?" I asked her. She looked at the drawing. "Ours," she said, "the one we're going to have." I put the drawing in my bag where I keep things I need to find later. I have looked at it many times since. I have not shown it to anyone. Not Dean, not Prentice, not Dwight, not Dorothy. It is ours, the one we are going to have. That is the sentence. That is the whole answer to everything my father said on that February afternoon. My father said she was rotten blood. She was 8 years old, and she was his granddaughter, and she was standing in freezing rain, and she was the best person in that house. That is the whole verdict. That is the only accounting that matters. The petition stays active. The photographs stay filed. The receipt is in Prentice's folder with a document number, and the drawing is in my bag, where I keep things I need. There is one more thing I want to say before I go. I have been a child protective services worker for 7 years. I have sat across from many parents who believed what they did was justified. I have sat across from grandparents who believed it too. I have learned in 7 years that belief in one's own justification is the most common feature of the cases I work. Rarely does someone do something terrible to a child and know it is terrible. Usually they have a framework in which it is correct, necessary, even loving. My father had a framework: rotten blood. A child who asked too many questions and influenced Ivy to push back and had made me into someone who had stopped being manageable. In his framework, putting her outside was corrective. I know this framework. I have heard versions of it in many offices, in many houses in Kingsford. I know what it produces. I know what the child looks like on the other side of it. I know the core temperature. I know the IV in the arm. I know the nurse bringing crayons. I know the drawing with the yellow door. The one held out with 2 hands. My father said she was rotten blood. I have thought about this sentence every day since February 14th. I have held it and turned it, and I have arrived at the same place every time. She is the best thing I have ever done. She asks questions. She pushes back. She holds things with 2 hands. She makes drawings of houses she wants us to have. That is not rotten blood. That is exactly who I raised her to be. She is going to keep asking questions. She is going to keep making drawings of houses she wants us to have. She is going to hold things with both hands and set things down carefully and notice what people love and turn it into what she gives them. Nothing that happened on February 14th changed any of that. That is the whole answer. Drop a comment telling me which part of this hit you hardest. If you know someone who has been told their love is too much trouble to shelter, share this with them. Subscribe to Calm Life Stories. I will see you in the next one.